If not, then the question is on adoption of the rules. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The rules are adopted, and we thank all of the members for their cooperation. And at this time, I'd like to announce that Mr. Blumenauer will be the Vice Chairman of the Select Committee for the next 2 years, and I want to congratulate him on that. And now turn to today's hearing. And for that purpose, I welcome back the members of the Select Committee for our first hearing of the new year. The beginning of a new year often prompts people to appraise the previous 12 months, and sensing the promise of a fresh start, a resolve to improve over the next 365 days. Though some New Year's resolutions have a habit of going in one year and out the other, Congress cannot weaken its resolve to address two of the most important issues before the nation: restoring the economy and fighting climate change. Over the past year, the U.S. economy suffered through a market meltdown, a foreclosure crisis, and volatile oil and commodity prices. During this time, 2.6 million U.S. jobs were lost. The Southeast suffered a serious drought, and a coal ash catastrophe in Tennessee created more environmental damage than the Exxon Valdez oil spill. We must prevent 2009 from having a similar summary. The Obama administration has outlined an economic stimulus plan to revive the economy through tax incentives and millions of jobs in renewable energy, infrastructure improvements, increased state and local aid, and improving the energy efficiency of buildings. These initiatives offer an unprecedented opportunity for green-collar jobs and environmental reform to be the backbone of a stronger economy. Just this past week, it was reported that a sustainable building supply company, Sirius Materials, is working with a bankruptcy court to buy a traditional window factory that closed last December. The company is trying to rehire 300 workers who were laid off with 3 days' notice. Congress and the administration must support these efforts on a national scale. The stimulus package cannot be a plan to dig ditches or create a couple of pork-ridden specialty projects. These greenbacks should yield green results for all. A stimulus package focused on more efficient and renewable energy can result in greater labor intensity and higher wages than investing in oil production. This is not robbing Peter to pay Paul. The Center for American Progress predicts a net increase of jobs created if Congress supports expanding the renewable energy and energy efficiency industries. As the stimulus plan is adopted, it must reflect short-term and long-term benefits. Direct infusion to states and localities can kickstart economic and energy development. Energy efficiency and weatherization can be deployed immediately through existing skill sets and technology. Tax incentives can encourage greater investment and employment in renewable industries, while smart grid development can sustain a national network of long-term permanent employees. A green economy didn't get us into this mess, but it can get us out. The promise of a green economy can be met in every state and every demographic. It is estimated that 30% of jobs created or sustained through the stimulus bill will be in construction and manufacturing, with another large share in the retail, hospitality, and mining industry. These sectors employ many low- and middle-income workers who have been hardest hit by the recession. Technological advancements and corporate investment opportunities can augment these economic gains. Congress and the administration must seek ways to find a green economic tide that lifts all boats. Some people may look forward to the new year as a new start on old habits, but we cannot afford to overlook the opportunity to strengthen the economy by developing a globally competitive industry for renewable energy, restoring our failing infrastructure, and increasing environmental and energy security. This is one resolution we cannot and will not break. Let me turn and recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin. Mr. Sensenbrenner for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me first start out by apologizing that I'm going to have to leave a little after 3 o'clock because I have a plane to catch to get back to Wisconsin. We're not really into the global warming bit, particularly today when the high temperature is scheduled to be -2. But nonetheless, I'm happy that the committee has been reauthorized and that we will be working on this issue in the next 2 years. Despite having more than 50 hearings in the last Congress, the Select Committee never fully examined how legislative proposals to address global warming will truly affect the American economy. I think we're all for creating jobs, green jobs, brown jobs, purple jobs, any kind of jobs. But I think that we also have to recognize that there are consequences to whatever we do. And if a rising tide is to lift all boats, it shouldn't be up to the Congress or the Federal Government to pick winners and losers. We live in a market economy. It's the market that will pick the winners and the losers. And we should not deprive people of their right to earn a living, to support their family, and to have a comfortable and acceptable lifestyle simply because they happen to be on the politically incorrect side of today's equation. So we're going to have to look at what trade-offs result from what we are dealing with here and what we are thinking of dealing with here. I look at the stimulus proposal as something that can either be very good or very bad, and not in between. Let me say that we hear from our friends on the other side of the aisle that this is all good and nothing is bad at all. I want to put a couple of things on the table. First of all, if all of this money is borrowed, we're going to have to pay it back sometime. And we're borrowing money in many cases from people who do not share our interest and values like China and OPEC. Secondly, we have to look at what happened in Japan in the decade of the 1990s, where they had stimulus packages that were almost entirely public works oriented. And there were more jobs created while the money was being spent building a new bullet train line or a new freeway or new buildings or whatever. But as soon as that federal or national government money ran out in Japan, then they were right back from where they started. And most Japanese call the decade of the 90s the lost decade. We Americans cannot afford to repeat that, and I'm afraid we might be going down that road. Now, finally, in terms of the whole issue of cap and tax, and that's what I call cap and trade because the carbon credits that have to be bought are really a tax. We've got to be careful that the businesses that we're trying to help and the segments of the economy that we're trying to help with the stimulus package don't end up having to pay on the other end what we're trying to give them on one end. For example, the concrete industry has a huge carbon footprint in it. Making concrete is probably more carbon emission intensive than driving your car between here and Philadelphia and back. And if we think we are creating jobs by improving our infrastructure, and a lot of that involves concrete, whether it's roads or bridges or buildings or things like that, we've just got to make sure that the government does not taketh away what it is giving with one hand. So I think we're going to have to look at this all very carefully. And we're going to have to look at it beyond the boundaries of the four corners of the piece of legislation that we will be voting on in the next couple of weeks. If we do that and do that properly, we will be doing ourselves and the American people a great favor. If we don't do this properly, we're going to end up being asked to bail out more industries that we harm either by sins of omission or sins of commission, and we are going to lose the accountability that we desperately need when the federal government appropriates a huge amount of money. And the final point I want to make on this whole business is accountability is really the key. There was no accountability with the TARP that was passed in September. There was no accountability with the Katrina money that was spent. And if we do not have much, much better accountability, then we in Congress are breaching the trust that the American taxpayers have given to us to spend their tax money wisely and to the best possible effect. Thank you.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciated the comments from my good friend from Wisconsin. I would take modest exception to the notion that we don't care whether these are green jobs or brown jobs, because I think it's very important that we do not use the economic stimulus, the investments that we're going to make, to create jobs of the past that are, in fact, brown or black or dirty, however you want to term that. And it is not just the invisible hand of the market that has created dirty jobs. Many of these efforts were deliberately subsidized by the federal government, by our policies in terms of energy, tax, public lands, to whether it's coal or nuclear or inefficient transportation patterns, or federal policies that virtually dictated suburban sprawl that made a huge problem, for example, for the inner city of Philadelphia, while it was subsidizing their competition. The notion that it's the invisible hand that has worked against Detroit, when our tax dollars have subsidized the establishment of modern foreign-owned factories in other states, I beg to differ. And I think, Mr. Chairman, part of what has been so important with this committee under your leadership is that for 2 years we've focused on what the security and economic provisions are. Some of our witnesses are no stranger to the committee or other committees that I sit on. They've been helping us to be able to develop many of the elements of this plan I think are excellent. I think it can be better. I look forward to hearing the comments from the witnesses here and working with them and with the committee to continue to push those boundaries. We can refine the package not just for what it means today, but it sets a standard for what this Congress and the new administration are going to do over the course of 4 years with reauthorization, with budget. This starts the job. It doesn't finish it. We need, however, and the distinguished ranking member is right on the money when he talks about how we're going to pay for these ultimately. Yes, we're going to stimulate. It would undercut our efforts if we would suddenly raise taxes and fees to pay for it now. But we're moving into an era where money does matter. And again, creatively creating and capturing green value can help us finance this over time. And I look forward to working with the committee and especially our distinguished witnesses here today to be able to develop these boundaries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Shadegg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to commend you for holding this hearing. I want to thank you for the adoption of the rules and beg your forgiveness for my tardiness. I understand they passed unanimously, and I would have been happy to join in that. I am given the restraint on opening statements which is occurring in other committees. I want to thank you for being generous in your allotment of time to opening statements in this committee, and hope it will continue to be the policy of this subcommittee or this select committee. And I appreciate that very much. I think this is an interesting topic, and I think it's good that we're having this kind of dialogue. For me, stimulating the economy is extremely important. It comes down to people losing their jobs and people being unemployed and people suffering. But there is an interface between the economy and the environment. I think as a nation we've learned that when we have done gratuitous damage to the environment, it has been economically ill-advised as well. But by the same token, I think it's generally true across the globe that nations that are financially prosperous and successful and doing well are the nations best able to protect the environment. That's one of the reasons why I think looking at a stimulus package and looking at a green component of a stimulus package is an appropriate thing to do. I was interviewed on the radio a week ago, and actually it was on a TV show, I think, and they wanted to know why I would not object to a green component of a stimulus package. And I said, well, I think the nation needs to be very concerned about its environment and needs to be looking at green issues. But we also need to look at those issues in the context of the economy. For example, I argue that there are things that we can do that both benefit the economy and benefit the environment. On, for example, the emission of greenhouse gases, I made a statement today in the Commerce Committee where I pointed out that there are things that we can do that have dual benefit, that both reduce greenhouse gases and also reduce our reliance on foreign energy. And relying on foreign energy is something that I think we've discovered is not good for the nation. So I am anxious to stimulate the economy. I am anxious to do so in a way which is environmentally sensitive. I don't think we can, using government money, spend our way out of the current economic troubles we're in. But I do believe that there are problems with our infrastructure in the country, and that where we can look at projects that have both a stimulative value and a value that benefits the economy, and particularly, for example, improving insulation in buildings, which will not only reduce greenhouse gases but also reduce our consumption of foreign oil, where we can make more efficient automobiles, which will have those dual benefits, or, and I'll conclude with this because I hear the tapping, where we can rely on renewables such as wind or solar, which will have that dual benefit. We should pursue those strategies first and foremost, and I yield back the non-balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Our country is in a recession. Unemployment is on the rise, as are foreclosures. At the same time, the stock market is falling, wages are stagnating, and home prices are dropping as well, wiping out hard-earned equity for many families. So it's our responsibility to do whatever we can in the short term to stimulate the economy. But in doing so, we should also make sure that our investments make sense in the long term and that they help solve the climate crisis. I believe we need an economic stimulus package, and that by focusing on green jobs and green infrastructure, we can create even more jobs than if we simply invest in traditional public works. In fact, we've heard testimony from other panels that that is the case. And in fact, we have in the past, other Congresses have in the past selected winners or losers, for instance, by exempting certain kinds of vehicles from emissions or safety standards, or by allowing extractive industries to take minerals out of public lands without paying a fair royalty. Those are choices that are being made by government, and I think that we should either have a level playing field or not, and not make choices like that, or we should try to favor those with the least environmental impact and most environmental benefit, such as renewable energy production, smart grid technology, energy efficiency, weatherization, which can not only create jobs but can have a multiplying effect, as my colleague Mr. Shadegg said, by saving consumers and businesses money on energy costs. And many weatherization projects are not so sophisticated as a highway or a bridge design. In fact, in my district, we don't call them shovel-ready. They're already screwdriver-ready. Many of the construction tradespeople who are laid out of work because of the downturn in housing could be hired immediately to start saving this energy and saving people the cost of heating or cooling their homes, and have an immediate impact on our economy. So these are good policy, economic, environmental policy, energy policy, and also for our sovereignty and our independence as a nation. Look forward to the testimony of our witnesses, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Okay, gentleman's time has expired. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody to be here, especially Mr. Jones, whose brilliant book, Growing a Clean Economy, is just wonderful. And if you have a sleep problem, don't read it. You won't be able to go to sleep. Thanks, Van, for your great work. I just want to point out, we are trying to maximize the amount of this renewal package that goes to energy. And the reason is what we want to have something that's quick, but we want to have something that's enduring as well. And we know that the enduring job creation we're going to have is in green-collar jobs. That's where the money is. That's where the jobs is. That's what's going to grow the economy for the next decade or two, not just for the next 60 days. And we think we've got quite a number of unexplored options available to us. Some of us are going to continue to try to improve the amount that's been dedicated to these green jobs, both in building, retrofitting our buildings so they're more energy efficient, which are immediate things we can do, R&D, lithium-ion batteries. And some people say we can't do this right away. I had a company, Johnson Controls, just leave my office an hour ago. They can have a lithium-ion battery manufacturing plant built in operation by next December. That's fast enough, and it's an enduring contribution. We cannot allow, and if we don't put pedal to the metal in this renewable package, we're going to trade a dependence for Saudi Arabian oil for dependence on Chinese lithium-ion batteries, and that's why we're going to try to do as much as we can on this, and thanks for all your testimony.
The gentleman's time has expired. The Chair recognizes the former mayor of Kansas City, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this hearing, and thank you for calling it. Particularly, I get a chance to have some dialogue with a friend and mayor of Trenton, New Jersey. We served together during my terms as mayor of Kansas City, Doug Palmer, and of course, Michael Nutter, who has already distinguished himself as mayor of Philadelphia. And as a former mayor, and my colleagues will tell you that at our meeting this morning, every statement I made as we were talking about this package dealt more with issues of which mayors would be concerned, so much so that one of my members reminded me that I'm the 5th District representative from Missouri in the United States Congress. But I am concerned if we're going to spend some enormous amounts, as I think we are, in trying to go into public housing, for example, retrofit them so that they are energy efficient. All of that is good. The problem is whether or not we have a sufficient workforce trained to do that. And if we are supposed to be screwdriver ready, as my colleague said, if these projects must go in 90 days, I am really concerned that we're going to leave out a large number of people who would otherwise have an opportunity to work in this arena, but are simply not trained in putting up solar panels. And there is a job component, a job training component, but here again, if that job component, I mean, there's some stuff that doesn't quite fit. I don't know how you can train people for a job that has to begin in 90 days. Because if it doesn't, my understanding is that the jobs don't start in 90 days, particularly money going to the governors. You use it or lose it. And so I'm interested in some exchange, some information, some suggestions that you might have on those particular subjects. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman's time has expired. The stimulus package is out. It's been announced. And the good news is that this committee is very pleased with what has been included in this sector. It reflects the 57 hearings that we had last year. It reflects the recommendations which we made with regard to what should be included in a stimulus package. There is $10 billion in the package to support wind energy. There's $4.5 billion for smart grid technology, which uses Internet technology to make America smarter about energy use. There's $10 billion for grants to cities and states for efficiency programs. There's $6.2 billion for weatherization. As Mr. Inslee referred to, there's actually a program for $2 billion in here for advanced battery research as we move to this electric vehicle future. So it's an excellent package. It starts to move us in the right direction, off of energy dependence and towards the goal of solving the problem of climate change. Our panel today is extremely distinguished, and it has a pedigree that is unmatched by any panel that we've had before us. And we begin by, first of all, although I'm a Patriots fan, Mayor Nutter, we're all rooting for you in Philadelphia to win. You're not a Jets fan, are you, Mayor Palmer? I don't know. Dallas Cowboys. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. So all the more reason to welcome you, Mayor Nutter, okay, to the panel. You're a great mayor of a great city. We welcome you. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Point of personal privilege. I just want to make sure that the "we all" doesn't include those of us from Arizona who will be rooting for the Arizona Cardinals. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate your sensitivity, but it's important to me. I do need to get reelected back in Arizona, and I don't want any incorrect implication to arise.
If I ever said "we all,"
there you go.
Then my mother is spinning in her grave somewhere in Boston. Okay.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to have had this chance to set the record straight.
Mayor Nutter, whenever you're ready, please begin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman Markey and Ranking Member Sensenbrenner, all members of this distinguished committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon to give testimony. I will address the 3 questions posed to the City of Philadelphia by the committee, but let me first preface all of my responses with an overarching comment about the evolving stimulus package. We as policymakers have grown accustomed to thinking of cities as warehouses of great need. But in the transition to a carbon-constrained economy, cities are now repositories of great value. Economists and engineers have demonstrated that energy efficiency is the most effective way to reduce our energy consumption. Cities are, if you will, the Saudi Arabia of energy efficiency. With our vast portfolios of existing buildings and infrastructure, cities are the best places to find this energy resource. We are engaged in a great debate over an $800 billion package to forestall an unprecedented economic catastrophe. But if we are serious about spending the money quickly enough to stimulate the economy and wisely enough to maximize the life cycle benefits of those investments, then funding existing and scalable local projects is one key to that success. Where this rubber meets the road is on the streets of Philadelphia and many other cities across America. It is therefore critical that Congress design a federal stimulus package that allows money to flow directly to cities and to those local programs that will spend the money quickly and wisely. Your first question was, how has the City of Philadelphia sought to strengthen its economy by reducing its impact on the environment? The City of Philadelphia has a long history of reaping the economic benefits of environmental stewardship, of doing well by doing good, as our Quaker founders might say. While I could begin with that history talking about William Penn's establishment of our green country town in 1682, of course I want to be very respectful of the committee's time today. So I'll simply say that making Philadelphia the greenest city in America has become a hallmark challenge of my administration. In April, we will be launching our ambitious action plan to reduce our exposure to rising energy prices, limit our environmental footprint, and reposition our workforce and economic development strategies to leverage our enormous competitive advantage in the emerging green economy. Indeed, the whole effort could be described as strengthening our economy by reducing our environmental impact. Your second question posed specifically, how does stormwater management affect cities and the environment? 200 years ago, Philadelphia was famous for many things, one of which was our water system. I'm proud to say today that admiration for the Philadelphia Water Department, which has responsibility for our stormwater management system, has only grown over the centuries. Cities such as New York and Boston, Washington, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia are spending billions of dollars to expand their stormwater management systems to meet the requirements of the Clean Water Act of 1977. The traditional gray infrastructure approach to stormwater management means building bigger and very expensive pipes buried in tunnels. That approach further disrupts the natural water cycle, effectively wasting the resource of rainwater. Today, there are new approaches being pioneered by cities like Philadelphia to use non-traditional green infrastructure approaches to limit the negative impacts of past stormwater management practices. These approaches, which have capital costs somewhat similar to gray infrastructure, all attempt to use the landscape itself to manage stormwater and are outlined in greater detail in my written testimony that was submitted. Your third question, what policies likely to be included in a stimulus package would help Philadelphia and other cities rebound from a weak economy? In answering this question, I focus my testimony on local investments that we believe quickly increase employment by simply scaling up existing local programs and capacities. We organize these investments into two broad categories: a building retrofit program and a green infrastructure program. First, the retrofit program. There are enormous potential returns to energy-saving investments in building retrofits, but the challenge is in designing effective programs. Building retrofits may be self-financing, but they are not self-implementing. They require both startup capital and effective delivery programs. The City of Philadelphia currently spends $19 million annually on housing preservation and weatherization, $11 million of which are supported by the CDBG program. These funds are used to provide weatherization improvements such as attic and wall insulation, window sealing and replacement, and upgraded heating equipment. We currently conduct some degree of weatherization in about 5,000 homes a year. How large could such an effort really be in Philadelphia? This work is truly caulk gun ready and could happen as quickly as funds are available. There are approximately 400,000 row houses in the City of Philadelphia. Using the estimates cited in my written testimony, we could raise the energy efficiency of, say, a quarter of those row houses by 20%. Examples are insulation, air sealing, cool roofs, and so on. By investing $250 million over 2 years, 50,000 projects would directly employ at least 1,000 people full-time over the course of a year. The kind of weatherization proposal in the above example, insulation, air sealing, cool roofs, typically has a simple payback and lower energy bills of about 2 years. In Philadelphia, we propose to use that payback to replenish the original $250 million. We propose to use that payback. With the Replenish Fund, we could weatherize every row house in Philadelphia in less than a decade, harvesting a huge return in reduced energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. Capitalizing this effort with stimulus dollars that could be leveraged by other sources and used to create a revolving fund is critical to conducting building retrofits at a scale under current financial conditions. Now a few words on the Green Infrastructure Program. We want to deploy green space as a public utility by placing thousands of new trees on city streets, increasing the amount of green open space, using pervious pavement on parking lots and playgrounds, and building green roofs and bioswales. We can use green to supplement pipes. In the long run, green infrastructure investments are much more sustainable as an adaptive approach to climate change and sea level rise. In the short term, they improve air quality and lower the incidence of heat stress, support walkable streets with bicycle and transit options, and provide access to outdoor amenities and fresh, locally grown food. And finally, investing in green infrastructure technologies also makes us more competitive by growing our position in new green technologies and job skills. Philadelphia has an extensive catalog of green infrastructure projects that we have demonstrated in neighborhoods all across the city, from green streets to city farms. We have over $100 million worth of green infrastructure projects capable of producing benefits in terms of water and air quality, family-sustaining employment, and more equitable access to healthy environments and food. But the current downward financial spiral is preventing us from making these investments. Providing stimulus funds for this innovative green infrastructure approach is critical to the City of Philadelphia realizing these benefits over the foreseeable future. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, the ranking member and members of the committee, a $250 million building retrofit program in Philadelphia would be consistent with the creation of a $50 billion national program. A $100 million green infrastructure program in a city like Philadelphia is consistent with the creation of a $20 billion national program. This is less than 10% of an $800 billion stimulus package, 10% focused on effective local programs that create jobs while improving the environment. Mr. Chairman, the ranking member, members of the committee, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Nutter, very much. Our next witness, the Honorable Douglas Palmer, the Mayor of the City of Trenton. He has served 4 terms in office. He's been a champion of working families. He's also received the Phoenix Award by becoming the national leader on brownfields development, and he recently completed a 2-year term as the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Welcome, Mayor Palmer. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, and it's a pleasure to be here and with this very distinguished panel and my good friend and neighbor, Michael Nutter. It's also good to see former Mayor Cleaver, but once you're a mayor, you're always a mayor. I really want to thank you for the opportunity to appear today on behalf of the United States Conference of Mayors, who represent 1,200 U.S. cities. And also on behalf of the nation's mayors, we also want to express our deep appreciation to the committee, especially you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Sensenbrenner, for holding a field hearing, as you remember, at our meeting in Seattle, Washington, and it was very, very fruitful. At that time, I was pleased to participate in this hearing to discuss the mayor's energy and climate efforts, and most notably our call for enactment of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, which is a top priority of the nation's mayors for the economic recovery package. Immediately following your hearing, Congress enacted the EECBG program as part of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, and thanks to your leadership, Mr. Chairman, members of this committee and others throughout the Congress. Since that time, the nation's mayors, through the Conference of Mayors, joined by the National League of Cities and National Association of Counties, have spent many months urging Congress to fund this program so that we can accelerate our nation's efforts through community-based investments and other initiatives to grow green jobs and a greener economy. Mr. Chairman, also we're pleased that the House of Representatives today released an outline of its American Recovery and Reinvestment Plan, and that plan includes $6.9 billion to help state and local governments make investments that make them more energy efficient and reduce their carbon footprint. Mr. Chairman, you asked for testimony on 3 priority concerns: how the economic downturn affected cities' efforts to meet fiscal and environmental goals, can a green economic recovery package create jobs and stimulate the economy, and how should stimulus funds between states and cities be allocated. The reality at the local level is the economic downturn is having profound effect on our fiscal and environmental goals. We strongly believe that there is evidence that supports this, that the economic recovery plan can create jobs and stimulate the economy while providing significant environmental benefits for local areas. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, our nation's cities and their metro areas are the engines of our national economy. Our 363 metro areas are home to 86% of U.S. employment, over 90% of wage income, and nearly 90% of our gross domestic product. Therefore, without the economic recovery of our cities and metros, there can be no U.S. recovery. We were going to release at our conference meeting this week a forecast of metro unemployment for 2009, which was prepared by Global Insight. And of course, it's no secret the news will not be good. Almost all metros will see significant job declines in 2009, and an amazing number of our metro economies will experience no employment gains for the decade. And with your permission, I'd like to add that report to the record.
Without exception, it will be included in the record.
Couple this jobless picture with a significant loss in our tax base due to falling real estate prices, which you'd mentioned as a part of the foreclosure issue, and cities are left without almost no fiscal capacity to expand existing or start new initiatives on climate protection, energy efficiency, and energy independence, areas that are absolutely essential to building a competitive economy for the future. I want to move a little forward and talk about economic recovery plan, job stimulus, and local environmental goals. You know, mayors have been consistent in our views about the opportunity and necessity to put this nation on a path to a green economy. This has certainly been a central theme of the mayor's advocacy of the conference's Main Street Economic Recovery Plan, which I'll be glad to answer questions later. First released in early November, the nation's mayors have been urging Congress and the new administration to make a strong commitment to Main Street-oriented investments that will create jobs and reinvigorate the economy. Mr. Chairman, to support this Main Street Recovery Plan, we're continually surveying our mayors on investments that can immediately stimulate job creation from completed projects before the end of 2010. This weekend, we will release an updated survey of ready-to-go projects that illustrate the variety and range of investments that could be made in cities all across the country. At our winter meeting, the conference will release its updated survey results based on responses from 779 cities, and one, of course, is in Phoenix, Arizona, just so you know, in Portland, and even in Wisconsin. We project that for each $1 billion in EEC-BG funding, about 10,000 local jobs in our cities would be created, exclusive of the many other direct jobs in manufacturing and other direct and indirect jobs that will result. These projects could include, as has been mentioned, energy retrofits of public and private buildings, installation of solar panels or wind turbines, deployment of new energy distribution technologies that significantly increase energy efficiency, and the development of systems to capture and generate power from methane at landfills. Mr. Chairman, we also believe, in conclusion, that certainly through this formula, one of the best ways to make sure that this money is done as Mr. Sensenbrenner wants to see it's done right, that there's competition. One of the best ways to do this and do it quickly is to put monies direct to cities. I love the states and I love the governors, but I think if you want to see things happen right away, where the rubber meets the road, or the nation's mayors that have projects that are transparent, no bridges to nowhere. You know, a lot of times any monies we spend has to be through all kinds of public bidding, as well as other kinds of things that are transparent. My citizens in Trenton, they won't allow me to put a bridge to nowhere. They'd have my head. And, you know, so we have a transparency. We can get the money out into our communities and our cities, and we suggest part of the monies that go direct to cities. And I want to thank you for having the opportunity to be on this distinguished panel, and look forward to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Palmer, very much. Next witness, Van Jones, is the President of Green for All and a Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress. Mr. Jones also co-founded the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights and has received numerous awards, including being selected by Time Magazine last year as an environmental hero. We welcome you back, Mr. Jones. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you. Good to be here. Goodbye, Congressman. We'll get a chance to talk later, I hope. All right. Mr. Chairman, other committee members, I'm just happy to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk. I was here in 2007 when the term green collar job was very rarely heard anywhere. This may have been the first place it was heard in Congress, and now it is everywhere, and that reflects something. It reflects a hunger and a desire on the part of the American people to solve the two biggest crises possibly ever to face this country, an economic catastrophe and a climate crisis, both of which could undermine our nation's security, our economy, not just now, but for decades into the future. You, unlike the rest of us, next week we're going to be celebrating. You'll celebrate for about 10 minutes, and then you're going to go back to sweating. Sweating over the details of this recovery, sweating over the details of how it is that we can actually beat the recession and global warming at the same time. The 111th Congress will be in the history books. 100 years from now, students will study this Congress, and they will ask one question: were you able to solve the problem? Were you able to deal with this twin crisis? How did you do it? And you're going to get a grade from our great-grandchildren: yes or no, pass or fail. The reason that green jobs are so important is because they are the most secure way to ensure success for this Congress. Because while I'll sit down and say, I've got to make a difference here, I've got to make a change, well, we just got a bad diagnosis, and the whole country now is looking for a change. You have the opportunity to turn this breakdown into a breakthrough, and you can if you honor three principles. Number one, this is the chance for America finally to return to its roots as the most important economy in the world, not because we are the #1 consumers, but because we are the #1 producers. Congressman Inslee pointed out that there is an opportunity to bring green manufacturing jobs back to this country, making batteries, making wind turbines, doing those things in the United States. Let us seize the opportunity to abandon the idea that we can forever be the most important economy in the world based on consumption, based on consumerism, based on credit cards. Let's get back to building rather than borrowing in the United States, number one. Number two, as we honor Congressman Sensenbrenner's plea for accountability, and I will underscore that, we don't want to see any more wasted money. Right. We can't afford it. We don't want to see any more of the Katrinas and those kind of things. We can't afford it. But as we do that, let's make sure we get our math right. This is a green economy we're trying to build. And in a green economy, the math is different. You don't just count what you spend. You count what you save. This is the key point. When you're building a green economy, you don't just count what you spend. You count what you save. And a massive investment, as the mayors are calling for, in energy efficiency will save us money over the long term. And that's the importance of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant that the mayors have fought so valiantly for. The third is simply this. We have an opportunity to do something that no generation of Americans has ever had the opportunity to do. We can build a green economy that Dr. King would be proud of. We have the opportunity to connect the people who most need work with the work that most needs to be done, and fight pollution and poverty at the same time, and be one country about it. We have a chance to slow up for just a second, as Congressman Cleaver said. We might have to delay 2 weeks to help some of the young men and young women that you represent to get a little bit more training to get involved. We might have to wait 3. We might have to hold up a month to get some of these young folks coming home from wars, coming home from prisons, coming out of high school. We might have to even wait an extra month to get them trained to become a part of this. But if we do that, we will have built a green wave that can lift all boats. We will have created green pathways out of poverty. We will have shown a new generation of Americans that we can stand together and do great things again, and that differences of color and class, starting point differences, don't matter, because we have a big future we're trying to fight for together. You, as the leaders of the 111th Congress, on this most pressing issue, have the opportunity to make us the #1 producer in the world, to change the math so we count what counts. Right? We don't just count what we spend, we also count what we save, and to connect the people who most need work to the work that most needs to be done. And if you do that, our great-great-grandchildren will give you an A+. Thank you very much.
He gave my speech. How did you get my speech?
Well, let's hear it for Van Jones down here. Can we? Was that a great speech, huh? That was fantastic. Fantastic. I agree with you. We don't agree on the Dallas Cowboys, but Van Jones, we agree on you. And our next witness, is this a great panel? Come on, I told you it was a great panel starting out here. Our next witness, Denise Bode, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the American Wind Association, Wind Energy Association. She is a nationally recognized energy expert and previously served as the CEO of American Clean Skies Foundation and president of the Independent Petroleum Association of America. Is this recombinant political DNA? This is the Obama era, huh? The president of the Independent Petroleum Association is now the head of the American Wind Energy Association.
I love it.
And this is the way the wind is blowing now, huh? So, Ms. Bode, we welcome you. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Members Sensenbrenner, sorry he had to leave as well, and distinguished members of the committee. It's really a pleasure to be here. My name is Denise Bode, and I am the CEO of the American Wind Energy Association. Our association is a national trade association of America's wind energy industry with more than 1,800 member companies, including project developers, manufacturers, component, and service supply. I have to tell you, I come at an extraordinary time. And sitting next to Van Jones, I swear I am so excited about the future. I was excited before, and now I just want to go out and do even better work to support this new era of green energy jobs. You know, the economic, the national security, the energy and environmental challenges are numerous and momentous. And fortunately, the industry that I represent can play a key role in solving many of them for the future, including as serving as an economic driver. Last week, I had the opportunity to attend the President-elect's speech, where he announced that he wanted to double the amount of renewable energy over the next 3 years, and our industry is prepared to achieve that. In fact, to do so, though, we need Congress to adopt the right policies in this stimulus package as part of the economic recovery bill now being developed. And we have had great, encouraging conversations over the past several days with members of Congress, transition team, and I'm really hopeful that when the details and the specs come out of this package, it'll include key provisions to enable us to continue to grow through the economic downturn. Let me tell you just a little about the status of the wind industry, because I think a lot of folks still think of it as kind of a boutique industry or not really a major part of the growing energy generation source. Last year was the 4th straight year of record growth in the industry. We're still compiling final numbers, but more than 7,500 megawatts of wind energy was installed, second only to natural gas for the 4th year running. Total wind energy capacity is now over 24,000 megawatts, and that's equivalent to 18 typical coal-fired power plants or 8 nuclear plants. That replaces 140 million vehicles off the road. Our industry has seen significant growth, though, in manufacturing as well. More than 65 new or expanded manufacturing facilities have been announced or open since January 2007. That's amazing. 21 states, too, not just in certain select areas. Auto sector facilities have retooled to manufacture for wind. A former appliance manufacturing plant was renovated to build turbine blades. And I suspect there is no other sector of the economy that can point to that kind of manufacturing growth over this difficult economic period. Even though our industry employs over 80,000 workers in good-paying jobs, we are just getting started and growing. In May 2008, the U.S. Department of Energy released a report on the feasibility of achieving 20% of our nation's electricity from wind energy alone by 2030. And DOE concluded that with absolutely no additional technological breakthroughs, that it is doable and that achieving the level of deployment would have significant benefits for the environment and economy. And they talk about achieving that with increasing to over 500,000 jobs. And let me tell you, if you look at the numbers, since that report has been issued, we have met or exceeded every target every year in adding those megawatts. But while the wind industry growth has been strong, the industry has not been immune to the larger forces that have dragged our economy down. The market is not there for us either. In fact, major developers of wind farms have publicly announced plans to cut back on turbine installations by 25 to 50% in 2009. And that setback's also impacting manufacturers. DMI Industries, a tower manufacturer, is laying off around 191 employees. There's a blade manufacturer laying off 150 workers. Another TPI Composites, another one delayed plans to hire 300 workers. And Trinity Structural Towers is laying off another 131. Many of those are from all across the U.S. Job losses will mount without congressional action. And according to recent analysis, a failure to address the credit crisis and make sure tax incentives for renewable energy work in a down economy will result in the loss of 89,000 jobs in wind energy and related industries. Because wind industry is capital intensive and growing, many developers do not have enough income and are not large enough tax bills to directly use the tax incentives, the production tax credit and accelerated depreciation that's intended to promote renewable energy. Instead, they partner with financial institutions that can use the incentives to offset their own tax liabilities. The economic decline has eliminated many major financial players from the tax equity markets, dramatically reducing the ability of many wind power developers to realize the intended benefits of available tax incentives. In fact, the number of tax equity investors has been slashed from 20 in 2007 to approximately 5 today. Let me tell you, it's critically important that we made a huge difference in addressing the ability to utilize these tax incentives. And that's a lot to ask of only 5 investors. Specific policies are needed in the economic recovery legislation. What the wind industry is seeking is temporary changes to federal renewable energy incentives that will help expand the number of investors in renewable energy projects, assist in providing adequate capital for project development, and ensure that incentives provided the benefit Congress originally intended when extending the PTC. Specifically, we support changes that enable renewable energy developers to effectively monetize their tax credits and accelerated depreciation benefits to the extent they don't have sufficient levels of taxable income to otherwise utilize those tax incentives. Why put it in place if you can't use it?
If you could summarize.
I will. Allowing renewable energy developers to carry back PTCs against their tax liabilities over prior decades, and third, a long-term extension of the PTC to provide a more stable environment for renewable energy developers. Thank you so much. I have a lot more I can talk about in question and answers, and I appreciate the opportunity for somebody that has worked in the fossil fuel area, who has seen the light and has been working now in the clean energy and the wind power era to testify before you and to hopefully add to this debate.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here as well. Appreciate it. Our next witness, Dr. David Kreutzer, is Senior Policy Analyst in Energy Economics and Climate Change at the Heritage Foundation. He taught economics at James Madison for more than 20 years, and he also served as the mayor of Dayton, Virginia in 2003 and 2004. So we welcome you, sir. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and the members of the Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming for this opportunity to address you. I'd like to point out that I would thank you even more heartily if next time you have me speak before Van Jones instead of after. My name is David Kreutzer. I am Senior Policy Analyst in Energy Economics and Climate Change at the Heritage Foundation. The views I express in this testimony are my own and should not be construed as representing any official position of the Heritage Foundation. Concern with the state of our economy is understandable, as is the desire to take action to improve it. The committee has asked me to address several questions regarding economic stimulus as it relates to energy and climate policies. The first question is, how would mandatory restrictions on carbon emissions affect the U.S. economy? Mandatory restrictions on carbon dioxide emissions reduce economic growth and destroy jobs. Last summer, a colleague, Dr. Karen Campbell, and I analyzed the impact on the economy from regulating carbon dioxide as a Clean Air Act pollutant. We have attached that report to my testimony, and I hope it would be entered in the record, if it's agreeable. Thank you. The damage to the economy is significant. The aggregate income loss, as measured by gross domestic product, over the period 2009 to 2029, is $6.8 trillion inflation-adjusted 2008 dollars. The job losses are also stunning. The manufacturing sector is especially hard hit, with job losses of nearly 3 million by the year 2029. Employment in machinery manufacturing and in rubber and plastic products and others dropped by over 50% by that time. Of course, some of the unemployed manufacturing workers find jobs in the service sector, but not all of them. The net impact drops total employment for most years by more than 500,000 and in some years by over 800,000. All of these losses, by the way, are net of green job creation. A stimulus package should include provision to explicitly exempt carbon dioxide as a regulated pollutant under the Clean Air Act. The second question is, what energy policies should be included in an economic stimulus package? A stimulus package should not constrain energy supplies, but allow them to expand, and should include provision to maintain and increase access to energy resources of all kinds, but also those on the outer continental shelf. We should keep moving forward to develop those resources. And while the bigger impacts of this policy may not come for several years or more, it should be emphasized that this part of a stimulus package does not cost the government anything and may well avert an economic crisis in the future. The third question is, As it develops a stimulus package, what lessons can Congress learn from European policies on carbon emissions and energy? Some claim that programs forcing a move to a less carbon-intensive economy will actually stimulate the economy, create green jobs, and increase income. The logic in supporting analysis of these studies ignores the negative impact caused by diverting resources to green projects from other areas of the economy. Since they are already pursuing many of these programs, Europe provides a lesson. Though many factors determine economic growth, stock market performance, and unemployment rates, European performance in these areas does not argue for green stimulus or for creating energy security through conservation. In 2008, the FTSE Euro 100 index, a broad measure of the euro area stock market, lost 47.3% of its value, while the Dow Jones Industrial Index for the United States dropped less, that is, by 33.9%. Their economic growth was smaller and the unemployment rate was higher than in the U.S. If European energy efficiency came from superior technology, we would expect to see lower energy prices than in the U.S. Instead, we see the opposite. The latest numbers for electricity costs show that household electricity prices are 50 to 200% higher in the European Union than in the United States, even for those European countries that lead the world in wind energy technology and use. Europe's lower carbon footprint seems driven more by demand killing higher prices than by efficiencies of a new energy economy. The European Union can claim to be leaders in producing wind turbines and can point to the many jobs in the factories that build them, but that doesn't mean their policies lead to a net job increase. Evidence better supports a contrary conclusion, that green initiatives cost more jobs than they create. A stimulus package that forces a move to uncompetitive forms of energy will raise costs and thwart economic growth. Instead, a stimulus package should focus on policies that reduce costs and make production and employment more profitable. Done.
Thank you, Mr. Kreutzer. And our final witness is Trevor Houser, who is a visiting professor at the Peterson Institute of International Economics. We welcome you, sir.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify on this important and timely topic. My name is Trevor Houser, and I'm a visiting fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics and director of the Energy and Climate Practice at the Rhodium Group, an economic research firm based in New York. Last year, the Peterson Institute, in partnership with the World Resources Institute, launched a multi-year initiative to examine the economic, trade, and financial effects of energy and climate policy. Our initial effort, Leveling the Carbon Playing Field, was published last May and was the first in a series of reports we will be releasing between now and the international climate negotiations in Copenhagen later this year. As the 111th Congress and President-elect Obama begin to work this month on drafting an economic stimulus package, there is an interest, as was reflected in the opening statements of members in this committee, in directing government spending in a way that not only generates near-term economic growth and employment, but also addresses long-term policy goals. Energy and environmental objectives, including reducing carbon dioxide emissions and dependence on foreign oil, are chief among these. And the notion of a green stimulus package has gained considerable traction among policymakers and attention in the press. A Wall Street Journal NBC poll that was released yesterday indicates that public support is strongest for prospective energy and environmental components of a stimulus plan. Given the speed at which an economic recovery package is being drafted, there's a need for a framework to help legislators evaluate which policies and programs to include in order to meet both immediate and long-term policy goals. In a forthcoming report from the Peterson Institute, my colleagues and I assess a range of policy design options currently being considered in terms of their energy and environmental as well as economic impact. In my testimony today, I'd like to share some of the key findings from our study, and I'm happy to follow up with members of the committee after the hearing to provide more detail on the work. I also have considerable more detail in the written testimony that was submitted. The study finds that well-tailored energy programs as part of a recovery package can create jobs and stimulate the economy while achieving significant cost savings for businesses, consumers, and the government. At the same time, it's clear that $100 to $150 billion in energy-related investment today is far from sufficient to meet long-term energy security and climate change goals. Green elements of a recovery package, however, can complement forthcoming energy and climate policy by focusing on four things. First would be market failures, opportunities to reduce energy demand and CO2 emissions through energy efficiency that will not likely respond to price-based energy or climate policies alone. The second is energy security, as a market-based climate policy aimed at reducing CO2 emissions, such as a cap-and-trade program or a carbon tax, does not necessarily reduce dependence on foreign sources of energy. The third is technology hurdles, as uncertainty about the availability of critical low-carbon energy technology between 2012 and 2030 creates anxiety about the future cost of climate policy. And the fourth is infrastructure bottlenecks. In addition to reducing costs, the deployment of low-carbon technology depends on the availability of enabling infrastructure, whether electricity transmission, CO2 pipelines, or mass transit. The government will necessarily have a role in building and regulating that infrastructure that facilitates a low-carbon economy. So with these principles in mind, let me provide some specific results from our analysis. And I think we have a chart up here. I like to hold off on the bubble charts until I get to that point, as people's attention immediately diverts from what I have to say. So let me walk you through what this shows here. So we modeled 10 different energy stimulus policy scenarios. And so on the y-axis here, it's a change in U.S. energy imports over the base case as projected by the Department of Energy in their annual energy outlook released in December. It's important to note that this includes both natural gas and oil imports. And in fact, in most of the scenarios, the decrease in energy imports is in the form of natural gas. On the x-axis, we have a change in annual CO2 emissions on average between 2012 and 2020, and that's measured in million tons of CO2. The size of the bubble indicates the number of jobs created 2009 to 2011. And what we include in here is both the direct jobs in the industry getting investment, the indirect jobs in supply chains, the induced jobs when the wages are spent, and the fourth category, which hasn't been included as much in studies to date, is the jobs created by the energy efficiency savings, which was referenced by a couple members on the committee. We subtract from that jobs lost in fossil fuel industry by lower spending on oil, gas, and electric power to create a sense of the net. Again, this is just for 2009 to 2011. We did similar analysis of what the long-term job implications would be, which I'm happy to share with the committee later. So some headline findings. Investments in building efficiency hold the most promise for near-term job creation and long-run reductions in energy imports and CO2 emissions. Spending $10 billion to weatherize homes or retrofit federal buildings would create and sustain up to 100,000 jobs between 2009 and 2011 and save the economy $1.4 to $3.1 billion a year between 2012 and 2020. Incentives for renewable energy can yield comparable energy savings and larger emission reductions, but with more uncertainty. Extending the production tax credit would stimulate an additional 16 gigawatts of wind power capacity construction over business as usual between now and 2004 at a cost to the federal government.
I'm going to have to ask you to summarize, and then
Sure.
in the question and answer period, we can come back to you.
So let me wrap up. The one note I'd want to leave you with is when considering green stimulus items versus other items in the stimulus package, the one component that people haven't considered is the long-term implications of energy savings. Money we borrow today will have to be paid back down the road. And the long-term revenue, both to government, to households, and in job creation can help offset some of those costs.
Thank you, Mr. Houser, very much. We'll come back to you. Now we're going to go to the question and answer period. I'd like to have a conversation with our two mayors in terms of how they envision the stimulus package, as you've heard the outlines, impacting on your cities and other cities in the country, and what the job creation potential is and the transformative capacity is of these programs to really even change the way in which the cities think of themselves. Could we begin with you, Mayor Nutter?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the question. I think there are two primary areas that I would draw attention to. The first is, as Mayor Palmer laid out, and I've made the same case, and I raised this issue in my testimony, stimulus dollars coming directly to cities, again, with every respect to states, and you have to balance those interests, are dollars that are going to be immediately spent. We talk about, I heard a new term today, but I usually talk about shovel ready, hammer ready, money ready. We heard about screwdriver ready, and I'm fine with that as well. That's a project that is 90 to 120 days ready to go, can be completed in 2 years. The stimulation, quite frankly, to our economy from the federal resources does two big things. One, helps us to not take counterbalancing actions of our own because of the economic crisis in our cities. And by that I mean, a couple months ago I had to announce that we were laying people off from city government, which is unfortunately putting more people out of work while the federal government is trying to put people back to work, cutbacks in programs and services and the like. So you stop a number of bad things from happening with the stimulus dollars. The second is we are able to make the kind of investments that I talked about earlier in my testimony. And I know that Congressman Cleaver had to go, but I would lay out for the record his concern with regard to how quickly some people can be trained. I will tell you, in Philadelphia, there's a new job training program that's been developed by our Energy Coordinating Agency. It will certify new weatherization specialists. Some of this training can be completed in as little as 2 weeks to get people ready to go and take on some of the challenges that are out there. Some programs may take longer, but there are many opportunities, again, when you talk about what Van Jones is talking about in terms of green-collar jobs. These often are not jobs that take forever to get ready for. So we can put people to work. We have the population. We have the projects. Literally, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, all we're lacking is the resources to make these projects happen and make them a reality.
Mayor Palmer, do you want to add to what Mayor Nutter just said?
Yeah, absolutely. And just the best way to get people in the inner cities and the metro economies is give people jobs. I, like Mayor Nutter, have the unfortunate task to make tough decisions, but we're laying off people in the city of Trenton. We talked about closing libraries, rec centers. It's something no mayor would want to do, and we struggle with that, but we need to get our people back to work. And you can do it, as Van was saying, as being producers. I'll give you just a quick example of how you can take care of a number of things with stimulus money going direct to cities, which is a transparent process. In the city of Trenton, we have, like many older Northeast cities, problems with lead and how it affects our children and their ability to learn. We've estimated that we have about 4,000 homes in the city of Trenton that have lead problems. You can, with stimulus dollars, do two things. One, you can train people on how to abate all the houses that have lead problems, which help in terms of environmentally. All those houses at the same time be trained how to retrofit a lot of these homes as well, whether it's energy efficient windows, whether it's thermostats, or creating green or white roofs. Not only can you do that, but you're training people that are willing, ready, and able to learn how to do those things. We're working with Public Service Electric and Gas, my city in Newark, or a training program with Isles and Youth Built to do those kinds of things. When you look at retrofitting public housing projects and getting the cost that you can measure, how much would it cost to reduce your energy efficiency in public housing, which have some of the largest buildings, New York City, for instance, or in Philadelphia or Trenton, Washington, D.C. Get the cost of how much it will save in terms of energy. You can actually use that cost, and if the banks would give up the money, use that savings and get loans that you could retrofit public housing, with the caveat, as you're doing that, to train the people that are in public housing or around public housing or in an area code, to train those individuals for jobs.
So you're saying that in a lot of these areas, these are ready-to-go jobs with not a lot of training necessary, that produce a huge benefit for your cities and get people off the rolls and into a job.
And real quick, absolutely. Yes. We have the Main Street, U.S. Conference of Mayors did this, Main Street Stimulus Plan, 774 cities participated. Projects that are shovel-ready in 2 years, because we have many more than that are sustainable and will be able to be done right and get moving, right away. So it's not pie in the sky. It's things that that can help our economy and help our citizens.
Mr. Jones, can you comment upon what Mayor Nutter and Mayor Palmer just said, and just deal with the city's aspect of this, if you could?
Happy to, and also hope we'll get a chance to talk about the rural agenda as well. But just to talk about cities for 1 second, there's a great program called Solar Richmond, very close to where we are. They take people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds and they teach them how to become solar panel installers in 6 weeks. What people have to remember is when we're talking about green jobs, we're not talking about space age, George Jetson, Buck Rogers, science fiction jobs that nobody's ever heard of. We're talking about very familiar trades. We're talking about very familiar kinds of work, but upgraded and upskilled to function in a more carbon-constrained environment. The Green Jobs Act, which...
So just give me an example. Let's take the Green Jobs Act. Let's take not solar panels. Let's look at Trenton and Philadelphia here for a second.
Sure.
Give us a couple of examples of the programs that, if we pass this package, will have an immediate impact on cities like Trenton and Philadelphia.
Sure. Well, for instance, you take homes that are leaking energy, just to sort of go on your example, whether public housing projects or frankly just regular homes. Most people are not going to, you could tell them all day if you wanted to, that if you invested X amount of money, you will ultimately save $3,000, $20,000 on your energy bill. Most people do not have the ability to spend that $2,000 to $3,000 right now. Right. If you have a more collective approach where we can actually deploy a workforce, look at the kind of jobs that very low skill people can do right away. Energy auditing. Knock on the door, you've got a clipboard. Knock on the door, you've got a small laptop. You talk to that homeowner, you show them where they can make immediate improvements in terms of their energy efficiency, but you also point out where a little bit more work can make a difference. What's the next level? Blowing in clean, non-toxic insulation. That's a very low-skilled job, but can have an immediate impact, literally that day, on the heating and cooling costs of that building. What's next? Replacing windows that don't fit, doors that don't fit, with high-performance windows and doors. Somebody's got to make all those parts and bring them in. There's your manufacturing agenda that's getting ready to go. Replacing those boilers and furnaces. Some of them are 20 years old, 30 years old, incredibly inefficient. Replacing them with new modern furnaces and boilers. You're going up the ladder now in terms of skill and training, and yet you can now retrofit homes with geothermal where you don't even need a boiler. These are the kinds of things that then have immediate short-term effects in terms of stimulus to the economy, but long-term effects in terms of savings and carbon reduction.
Good. Well, let me come back to you again, Mayor Nutter and Mayor Palmer. Mayor Nutter, what's your response to Mr. Jones in terms of how this would impact Philadelphia or Trenton?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jones, one is absolutely correct.
Paintbrush ready, yeah. And Mayor Palmer. Microphone down there? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer.
Thank you. I appreciated, Mayor Nutter, where you were talking in a more want to be on your city council. Where you talked about issues that were related, for example, to water quality as part of the economic stimulus, both in terms perhaps of the standards and the methodology. And I would put to you, actually to both our mayors, a request for you to help us as we work with the new administration to think about how we change the standards of the relationship of the federal partnership.
Yeah.
A lot of it is prescriptive, having still scars that haven't healed entirely from trying to work with the previous administration when I was in your shoes, trying to negotiate agreements with EPA about spending a couple $1 billion much more effectively if we were greening it.
Yes.
And we found out that people just wouldn't accept the extent to which you, with the resources with your fellow mayors, could help us develop alternative approaches for regulation where you would commit to not just meet but exceed the water quality standards, but we'd cut a deal with you so that you could be more flexible, daylighting creeks, using maybe some investments upstream that would actually produce better water quality improvement than you spending massive sums for a river that's already polluted before it gets to you. Would you be willing to help us with the certified smart people that work with you to think about how we change those standards? Giving you some flexibility?
Absolutely, Congressman. This is some of the most important work that goes on in Philadelphia. We, again, not trying to brag too much about our great city, but the Philadelphia Water Department has been a leader in stormwater management for a long period of time, and it's why I talked about earlier. Sometimes even on the environmental side, when people talk about, well, we're just going to plant a lot of trees and, isn't that nice? I love trees as much as the next person. It's not just about trees. It's about the fact that the trees absorb water, that we create the pits around the trees to take more water. 90% of the major storms in Philadelphia result in about an inch or less of rainfall. Rather than that water going into our stormwater management system, it should be going into pervious surfaces all over the city of Philadelphia. That's being smart about green and not investing in the old gray infrastructure as opposed to green infrastructure to deal with stormwater management issues.
Well, where you can help us, and I won't take time now, I have some other questions for panelists, and I want to circle back with you, but where you can help us so we can look at this comprehensively with the new administration. You mentioned the street trees, which deal with the heat island effect, the reduction of stormwater runoff, and actually some natural filtration. If we can think comprehensively, so you can get multiple benefits and maybe move ahead of the line as we move this forward. Mayor Palmer, you referenced, I think, a partnership with your local utility. And I am curious, and Mr. Jones may have some observations along this line. We have thousands of utilities, public and private, around the country, electric, gas, sewer and water, that collectively, probably the top 4,000 have a monthly relationship with probably, what, 95% of American business and households. They have a credit rating that is pretty good these days. They have established relationships and programs, and they work with subcontractors. Can you envision our being able to work maybe in the next round of energy legislation that's coming, where we could develop partnerships where we could actually use on-bill financing that wouldn't require massive federal outlays, wouldn't require lots of actual approval and tax increases, but develop a partnership with those public and private utilities to finance deep green projects that would have a payback period that would be well within the scope of when they would pay it back, 3, 5, 10 years. Maybe even the federal government and other government agencies negotiate a special rate to finance the deep green, not just energy efficiency, but it may actually be new construction or major reconstruction. Have you given any thought to that, or does that have any potential? Mayors, Mr. Jones?
It absolutely does, and that's one of the reasons why we were able to work with our Public Service Electric and Gas to come up with the pilot program to do those kinds of things. They did have to go through the Board of Public Utilities to get approval on what they wanted to do, but certainly I think now's the time, and they're willing to make those kinds of investments. The other thing I just want to let you know that the U.S. Conference of Mayors and our President Manny Diaz wanted me to let you know that the Conference of Mayors is ready to work with you, even on the water. We have what's called the Mayor's Water Council. Mayor Diaz from Albuquerque and Mayor Cootie from a town in Arkansas or Mississippi. He's going to kill me when he hears I don't, but I got his name right. But we talk about all kinds of issues: water, wastewater, removing the volume cap, you know, for private activity bonds, and a number of issues that we are a great resource to help in that area and to work with you and this committee as we, you know, craft the kind of policy that'll help us.
Maybe before I turn to Mr. Jones for elaboration, let me just posit one other item, because I'm not certain we should be afraid of actually engaging our state public regulatory commissions. Right now, many people in the inner cities are disadvantaged because you are subsidizing sprawl and inefficient patterns of energy, the line loss. I mean, maybe we should be looking at having a regulatory system that rewards efficiency, that is sanctioned by the state. We sort of get into wind energy and other alternatives here, but it's using existing mechanisms and the market.
Congressman, let me, with your permission, just share the two pieces of information from back home in Philadelphia. First, PECO Energy, the main energy, the energy company in Philadelphia, was a leader, is a leader in green roof activity on one of their buildings in Philadelphia. One of the first green roofs for any corporation was done by PECO. Second, the city is working with PECO to reduce our total base load by 1% by 2011. And there's also new state legislation in that regard. So when you raise the issue of states can absolutely have an impact here. That would result in 20% less electricity being used, equal to about 200,000 homes right in the city of Philadelphia. So there are clear partnerships, the city, state, and federal level on all of these issues. And I would be pleased, I'm sure Mayor Palmer and many others will be pleased to work directly with you and the members of this committee and the Congress on these kinds of issues.
Well, I would love to follow up with you both in terms of the water and the utility partnership so that we're able to magnify the federal legislation in part, and Mr. Markey's got all sorts of leadership positions, and we may be able to convince him to have some federal assistance and incentives for decoupling, and maybe on the Ways and Means Committee, we can find a little way to nudge that in terms of how they're treated financially. Mr. Jones, I'm sorry.
Well, first of all, where have you been all my life, man? I was like, you had me at hello with that. No, this is exactly where I think the next round is going to be. Our utility companies have to be partners to us at the local level to do the one thing we can do right now, which is to capture these energy cost savings and use them as a way to incent private capital. McKinsey did a study that shows that in 2 to 4 years, all the work we just described around energy retrofits and weatherization can pay for itself in energy cost savings, which means essentially you're talking about, if you do everything the mayor's just said, look what you just did. If you can recapture those cost savings by having on-bill repayment, like you said, if the utility companies will be partners with us, you get to bring up home values, bring down unemployment, cut greenhouse gas emissions, clean up the air, reduce asthma, and it pays for itself. It's revenue neutral, right? There's a genius in this room named Jason Walsh, who I want to brag on and point out, who is he's the man blushing. Just wave your hand a little bit, they know who you are. Jason Walsh has actually taken your instinct and your insight and put together a proposal that would actually, for about $30 billion, let us weatherize and retrofit millions of buildings, put about 600,000 people to work, and because you're using revolving loan funds and loan guarantees, it would pay for itself. What we need is partnership with local utilities. We can unlock the value. We have a choice. As the mayor said, the money can go out the roof, or it can go into the pockets of workers and then become savings for homeowners and for building owners. That's the opportunity that we've got here.
I have to leave, but
no.
This committee had me when they asked me to be here and my other colleague. But thank you very much, the U.S. Conference of Mayors. We look forward to working with you.
I will look forward to following up with you on these specifics.
Absolutely.
As you're walking out the door, one little thing, Mr. Chairman, before I appreciate your indulgence, but it doesn't look like there are lots of people waiting to elbow ahead of me. I want a cautionary note just in terms of the training, because some of the people we want to engage in this, again, based on prior life as a local official and dealing back when we used to have training programs, CETA, JEPTA, I mean, back this acronym, nobody in this room is old enough to remember this stuff.
Well, some of us are, sir.
But dealing with the population that we want to engage, I'm sorry, 2 weeks isn't enough. And I am with you 200% in terms of training and engagement and using the community, working with the community college, working with the utilities, working with the people in the affected neighborhoods. But we can't set this up to fail. Right. And we need to invest in particularly some of these young people or people who've been out of the workforce for some time. There's more than just learning how to slap down the solar panel. That's the least of it in terms of job readiness. So please make your case. I think it's right that it can be done much easier than people think, but we shouldn't minimize the need to invest in the human infrastructure if we're going to be successful in the energy infrastructure that you challenge us.
If the chairman, if the chairman would allow, on Congressman's point, one of the issues that I have been raising about the overall stimulus package has been the issue with regard, the word of the decade may be infrastructure. And I'll just have to say this, as at least mayor of Philadelphia and some of the things that have happened in our city and many other cities across America, whether it's on the energy efficiency side, and Congressman, I absolutely agree with you. I was trying to be responsive to Congressman Cleaver about one particular program. For some things, 2 weeks may be enough. For some programs, 2 weeks is nowhere near enough, and there's everything in between. But when we talk about infrastructure, whether it's bridges, roads, tunnels, underground communications, stormwater management systems, schools, and the like, specifically in the construction industry, but a number of others, I would only ask for consideration that in cities like Philadelphia, there are many people who have been left out and locked out of opportunities to participate, especially in the construction industry and a number of others. And I don't know ultimately how you will do this, but for many of these job creation programs, there's certainly, I would ask that there might be consideration of requirements for diversity in the workforce, job training components, the opening up of apprenticeship programs, and others. If everyone is supposed to participate in this economic revitalization, if we're really talking about putting Americans back to work, then we just can't put the same Americans who've always had the opportunity back to work and leave others sitting on the sidewalk. And I would ask for that consideration as well.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your courtesy. I hope at some point, we spent a little time in Portland, Oregon. We were the first city in the country with a comprehensive energy policy in 1979.
Thank you, Mayor.
Wow.
We've got a few of these. We've had great experience working with this in the past. The chairman indicates that someday we may even visit Portland to talk about some of the transportation, land use, and energy connections. But I really appreciate the way that you have captured it and the way the panel has presented an opportunity. And this has been very helpful for me, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. And to you, I couldn't agree with you more. I was in a meeting last week with some African-American congressmen, and one of them was a little bit older, said that his mother and father, they were not happy in the South during the New Deal because the governors of those states, who were Democrats, insisted that in most New Deal programs there was actually a prohibition on African-American participation in them. And it was only when Harry Truman's Fair Deal came along in 1949 that there was a fuller inclusion. And I agree with you. We have to make sure that we do this in a way that reflects a fair deal for the 21st century in this green jobs area. And we thank you so much for being here. It's our honor to have had you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Van, now we can have you swing back over to the other side of the panel. And I'd like, Ms. Bode, if you could, to just elaborate a little bit more on this green job revolution as it is manifesting itself in the wind sector. And tell us about, maybe you could do this, Mr. Jones, as well. The president of the American Steelworkers told me that it takes 28 tons of steel for every wind turbine that's built in America. That's a lot of steel workers.
Inclusive of,
thank you, Mr. Mayor, very, very much. I was honored to have you here, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about that and the jobs implications for, for our country, not just in, with the way people might think of it as some kind of white collar, Boston and San Francisco kind of oriented wind industry. Who gets employed, and can you take us through that from beginning to end?
Absolutely. In fact, it's interesting that you asked today because tomorrow the President-elect will be visiting one of those facilities in Akron, Ohio, like many other facilities that has expanded from doing auto parts and other kind of parts and equipment to adding jobs in the area of building supply chain equipment for wind turbines. He's going to be going to Cardinal Fasteners, which provides those huge long bolts that helps put those turbines and facilities in place and into the ground. So it's a very exciting opportunity, I think, for America. Our association had a workshop in December where they thought they might have 200 or 300 companies come to learn about opportunities to convert, to grow, to add new jobs in the wind area. Over 850 companies showed up in Cleveland, Ohio to try to see how they might grow and add these jobs in their area. When you talk about 90,000 jobs, it's just a down payment. It's like where you are just at the beginning of this new clean job revolution. I mean, we're talking about 500,000 jobs just as just as a kind of a starting point when you start putting these in place. And as I said, the megawatts are growing exponentially, and it's not just the generation, the jobs around generation, it's about manufacturing facilities, much of these parts were really not made in the U.S. initially, and now all these new facilities are coming to the U.S. When you talk about the growth in energy jobs, this is where the growth in energy jobs, clean energy jobs in over 21 states, 65 new manufacturing facilities have opened up.
A lot of people are talking about a nuclear renaissance. Right now, the nuclear industry produces 100,000 megawatts of electricity every day. Now, you're saying that the wind industry added 7,000 new megawatts.
Second only to natural gas, which is
electricity
the top.
this year.
Yes, sir.
And 4 or 5 years from now, if we get the policies right, how many new megawatts per year do you think we could produce in the United States? New megawatts.
We're talking about 20% of the nation's electricity. And
so do you think that could be
so
12,000 new megawatts a year?
13 gigs.
What do you think is possible?
Well, last year, we don't have the final figures in last year, but we know it approached or exceeded 7,500 megawatts. It's going to be growing like that. Well, if we get the stimulus package right, we hope to at least match that or get close to that if the uncertainty is not like that.
But 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what do you think
we're going to be able, in 3 years, we will meet the President's target of doubling the amount of generation that we have. Over the last 3 years, we doubled it. So, I mean, we believe truly.
What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give people who are listening an idea, though, of the scale of what we're talking about. Okay, so
we're talking about 16 gigawatts.
So, yeah, but again, I'm trying to keep it in one metric, and that metric is the nuclear industry produces 100,000 megawatts a year.
Okay.
That's 20% of all electricity in America. They haven't built a new power plant successfully from ordering to completion since 1974. Okay. So there won't be any new nuclear power plants to come online in the United States, even if they began today, for about 10 years. In 10 years, how many megawatts, for example, do you think that we could meet? So today there are
24,000.
24,000. You're saying that you will meet, if this stimulus package is put together, you'll meet the President's goal of doubling that in 3 years. Is that correct?
Right, that's right.
Well, that takes you to 48,000 megawatts. Again, the nuclear industry, after 50 years, produces 100,000 megawatts a year. So if you extrapolate that out
to the 20,
and you go out 10 years altogether, you might be looking at 100,000 to 125,000 megawatts of wind in the United States before the first new nuclear power plant produces 1,000 new megawatts of wind. Is that correct?
Good point, yes.
Does that math work for you, or is that too ambitious for your industry?
I don't think it's too ambitious at all.
Well, that's exciting, because that's a kind of a guarantee of what's going to happen, because there haven't been any new nuclear power plants for so long that we know this is something that is creating new jobs. And what is the upside? How many jobs per year do you think you can actually create in the wind industry if you were producing 15,000, 20,000 megawatts a year?
Well, I think what we're talking about right now is in the next, with this and with the renewable electricity standard, which we hope to have into place in the next 3 years, perhaps close to 200,000+ jobs.
And by the way, this is not to say there isn't going to be any new nuclear power plant generation in America. It's just to contrast it so that there can be an understanding of what's happening already in the wind sector. And this doesn't include solar or geothermal or tidal or a whole range of other renewable energy sources that will be creating new jobs over the next year as well. Mr. Jones, how would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, that's an exciting number when you talk about 200,000 jobs, creating something that is going to deal with the greenhouse gas crisis. One of the things I think is very important is that we look at Detroit, we look at our so-called Rust Belt. Why don't we put Detroit back to work? not making SUVs that are going to help destroy the world, but making these wind turbines. The thing about wind turbines is they're so heavy that it actually is not, it doesn't make sense to make them on the other side of the world and bring them over here. When you're talking about 28 tons of steel, you're talking about putting steel workers to work in this country, and you can put our automakers back to work. A wind turbine has 8,000 finely machined parts in it. 8,000. That is a car, okay? So, you want to bail out Detroit, that's great. But let's bail out the people and the planet too. I would love to see a $15 billion purchase order from the U.S. government going to General Motors. They're called General Motors, not General Cars, not General SUVs. The motors we need right now are these wind turbines to get us the jobs of the future.
They actually make automobiles in Akron, Ohio. Sure. Exactly. Or they did. It's in jeopardy. But the President's coming with some good news tomorrow for them, huh?
Absolutely.
That those same workers can be employed making some other technology, as Van Jones just said, that also requires a skill set that can help to assemble the new energy devices for the next century. Let me turn again and recognize the gentleman from Portland.
I wanted Ms. Bode to just make a request. I'm wearing another hat here. You mentioned some of the vagaries of the finance, because at this point we need some federal assistance with the production tax credit, something that is part of how we've helped incent the industry, and there have been all sorts of federal involvement in all sorts of energy sources in times past, and we've made a judgment that I think is appropriate that we need to help get this off the ground to get to critical mass, and we still need to have some financial incentive. A financial incentive. B, it needs to be predictable and efficient. I would wonder if you could help us, with the benefit of your team of members and staff, to evaluate the efficiency of the production tax credit. How much of what we give away of federal tax benefit actually is used by the developer to create the project? How much leakage is there because of the vagaries? Some of it's unpredictable. Now there are not quite as many people who can use the tax credit, and there's a discount. There's always some sort of discount in deal making. And sure. So are you in a position to help us evaluate just how much of each dollar ends up in the production of wind energy?
Well, it's interesting because, the production tax credit is so interesting because it is based on the production of electricity. It's not like the investment tax credit where, you can build something and then get the credit without the next step. So actually, that's why it was put in place, which I think is, again, a very important tax policy consideration. But the lion's share of the money from the production tax credit in normal years is monetized for the use to go into building and using for those facilities. But in the startup years, most of these companies do not, they're investing all their money into building this stuff, so they don't have the extra revenue to utilize the tax breaks on it. So in terms of the exact percentage, I can get that for you. Well, but that's part of the problem now. That's why we're talking about asking for the refundability, right, the transferability of the issue, because that way you're actually able to utilize all of it, right, for them without having to deal with going through the financing.
And we have market. A package that, at least the last meeting I was at, seemed to have elements here that address those problems.
Right.
So we hopefully will give you a clear window to operate going forward here for hopefully the next couple of years, so that we can kind of sort this out. While we do that, I would appreciate your helping us evaluate its effectiveness who's taking, how they're able to take advantage of it, what the efficiency is in terms of the federal outlay versus how much is actually utilized, how much leakage there is. And in part, any calibration or estimate about loss because of uncertainty, the start, stop, these would help us because we're going to have an energy bill, I anticipate, coming forward in the next few months as the administration kind of settles in. And we will be, because of the artful way that Karl Rove and Tom DeLay and Bill Thomas structured all the tax cuts to kind of expire, we're going to be revisiting the tax code in a hopefully pretty comprehensive way. So we may be able to work with you to make sure that the benefit, however much it should be, actually gets to you in the most efficient way.
I very much appreciate that. And I wanted to say thank you to you as well, because your work in terms of renewables, both wind and solar, on the Ways and Means Committee has been absolutely incredible, and I wanted to say thank you for the work on that. Also wanted to mention, as an old tax hand, I started off working on the Senate Finance Committee staff back in 1979. So I've kind of been through the whole wars on the renewable, what was a renewable tax credit, not a production tax credit. And I was a state regulator for 10 years, and so we actually had to start wind projects in my home state of Oklahoma by putting an encouragement in rate cases. So what you do when you do not have a long-term or a permanent extension of these tax credits, whether you decide at some point to eliminate them or not, is you create this rush to build a project, and then without the certainty, then you have this drop-off. Right. And so you don't have the long-term interest, you don't build up the market of investors available to go in and to raise the capital to have this be a growing industry, and that is what has happened. We can chart it every single time, the tax credit, and that's why this is an important short-term addressing this short-term problem in terms of the production tax credit. What we really need long-term and mid-term is to really get in there and address a renewable electricity standard that addresses the issues you were talking about, utilities, addresses the issues, giving people certainty, a signal from the federal government that this is the right answer.
And I am confident that that should and will be a part of the next wave in terms of having a real renewable portfolio standard in the legislation. Mr. Houser, do you have?
I can maybe provide some color on that. We analyzed this in our study, and Ms. Bode has more on-the-ground experience with the wind industry. But from a modeling standpoint, the Department of Energy currently predicts that between now and 2014, an additional 5.9 gigawatts of wind will be built. In our scenario, using that model, when we extend the production tax credit to 2014, the additional wind capacity build is 16 gigawatts. So you're paying for the 5.9 gigawatts. It would have happened anyway, but there's 16 gigawatts in addition created. So, which isn't bad in terms of leakage, as you say. It's about 70% of the marginal increase that you get as a result of your tax credit. The more important question, I think, is what this body and the Senate are planning in terms of climate policy. Because if our goal is to reduce CO2 emissions, then as an economist, that's where we'd want to put the price, is on CO2 emissions, and not support specific technologies. If you put in place something like Lieberman-Warner that took effect in 2013, in addition to the production tax credit, the amount of new wind created in our model goes up to 44 gigawatts. But the share of that the PTC is responsible is significantly less. And so you're double paying for the wind that you get, both through the production tax credit and through climate policy. So I think in thinking about the time frame for incentives created under a stimulus package, it's important to keep climate policy in mind. Because again, all the things that we're talking about here are only going to make the very smallest of a beginning in reducing CO2 emissions.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. I'm actually feeling a little awkward because I think I remain the committee, and I have to be, I've got 9 minutes to sprint across the Capitol. So I apologize, but I do deeply appreciate your being here. I have a letter that I want to enter into the record that Mr. Inslee wanted to be a part of it. And we will look forward to following up with you individually because you've really sparked our interest and attention, and look forward to continuing this work with the committee and maybe in some of our other committees on budget and ways and means. I'm sure we'll be crossing paths.
Well, you've given us a good to-do list, so I will follow up.
That's good. Thank you so much. Also, our colleague from Heritage, I think, raised some very, very important questions, especially comparing what's happening in Europe to what could happen here. And I think his point about doing what we can to lower the cost of clean energy is something we should follow up on very aggressively.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. I look forward to getting together with you.
Can I get your card? Is that all right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good.